Thank you, Deputy. I rise to speak on the Mental Health and Wellbeing Amendment Bill 2023, and I thank the member for Lowen for putting together a briefing for members of the opposition, and I note that she has moved a reasoned amendment on this bill. Of course, the purpose of the bill, purpose of the Act, to make minor amendments to the Mental Health and Wellbeing Act 2022, to make consequential amendments to the Judicial Proceedings Reports Act 1958. The Mental Health and Wellbeing Act 2022 implemented recommendations of the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system, and the Royal Commission interim report was handed down in 2019, as we've heard many times, but 5 of the 9 recommendations highlighted the desperate need to build the mental health workforce to ensure sufficient personnel to effectively deliver mental health services under the reform system. That was handed down in 2021, and as many have done on this side of the chamber, it's important I emphasise once again that the Coalition, the Liberals and the Nationals fully support all recommendations from the Royal Commission. This amended bill has been introduced to fix a number of errors contained in the Act, including incorrect cross-references, some typos, but it also pushes back a number of recommendations outside the timeframes for implementation set by the Royal Commission, and substantially changes the recommendation for a mental health crisis response to be health-led rather than police-led.
Important point.
It is a very important point. I note the member for Albert Park there said some situations would require it, but some situations shouldn't become all situations out of a matter of convenience. I think about my community locally in Nepean, like many across this state. A lot of the community members share mental health related issues and require ongoing support related to their mental health. I do feel there is a concern, though, if you change back to a police-led response, this actually could become traumatic for some of those vulnerable members of the community suffering from mental health issues. And while the vast majority of Victorians who suffer from some sort of a mental health-related illness would never have contact with police, so why all of a sudden are we going to put them into the care of a police officer unnecessarily? And I guess add that added stress for them with police intervention. I will say that everyone in this chamber would acknowledge and respect, the terrific work that Victoria Police do. But I think in an ideal situation, we would want to have more mental health workers, more ambulances. I think part of this has stemmed from not having enough ambulance operators, ambulance workers on the road and being able to take care of this situation where they've had to hand it back to police. But I'll also note that Victoria Police is suffering a shortage of police officers as well. So we want Victoria Police to be able to do their job. We want healthcare workers to be able to do their job. In an ideal world, I think they would both be doing the bits that they need to do. In the final report, the Royal Commission stated that given most people experience a mental health crisis have done nothing illegal, the involvement of police can actually be humiliating and traumatic. And the government actively promoted its intention to move to a health-led response last year, and as stated in their 2022 bill report, the shift from a police-led response to a health-led response is supported by the majority in the sector as a more appropriate approach to deal with Victorians in crisis. However, at the time, they were not clear how that would be applied in practice and what additional resources would be allocated to enable this to occur. A lack of appropriate government resourcing to implement this change in approach will seemingly result in ongoing inappropriate response to people in mental crisis. And now the government has reasoned the walk back to a police-led response, as I mentioned, is due to a lack of resources within Ambulance Victoria. And during the briefing, it wasn't clear to us that this was due to workforce shortages, training deficiencies, EBA negotiations, or a combination of all of the above. So some clarity around why Ambulance Victoria isn't being used more widely when that was the recommendation, I think, is probably needed. As I mentioned, the Police Association have raised their concern that the walk back unreasonably add additional pressure to their limited resources, and it also isn't in line with what was recommended in the Royal Commission. And under least restrictive principles, Ambulance Victoria should remain as the legislated option to respond to mental crisis emergencies. As the member for Morwell said, and others, we support the majority of this bill. We've moved a reasoned amendment because of clauses 13 and 14 that does change that response from a health-led response to a police-led response. I'll touch a little bit on Nepean. So we have, as much as everyone wants to think it's all Sorrento Portsea and hilltop mansions and cliffs, we actually have some of the most vulnerable people in Victoria, some of the lowest socioeconomic postcodes, as well as a community of around 1,000 people sleeping rough on the foreshore in Rosebud every single night. There are some terrific organisations, and I've mentioned many of them in this place before, the likes of Vinnie's Kitchen, but for example, that homeless or rough sleeping cohort does deal with a lot of mental health challenges. And Vinnie's Kitchen in the last week or so have actually stopped their service of serving hot meals to people on the foreshore, those rough sleepers, from 6 nights a week, 7 lunches a week, back to 6 lunch services only because of safety concerns. And that's mainly due to the inability or lack of capacity for law enforcement to actually police the safety of Vinnie's Kitchen, and because of the mental health issues that come with some of those people who do sleep rough. So if we're going to go and put that cohort of people and the inability for services already to, in my area, be able to deal with it, putting a police-led response back onto that. I know, many of the members in this chamber would have spent time in my area, especially over summer periods. They know how busy it gets, how stretched resources are during that time of year, and while it's a fantastic time to be down there, there's been times where Rosebud Police Station is open, Rye is closed, Sorrento is closed because those officers are out on the road dealing with the extra 80 to 100,000 people that are on the peninsula during summer. I just wonder how, in a mental health emergency, ambulances heading from Rosebud to Frankston, if needed, how we're going to manage such a response on the peninsula. I encourage the government to keep working on what they're doing, but also to try to find a way to deal with that. Some of the groups, I'm really excited about the Southern Peninsula Youth Hub being opened up as a place for young people that services now like Headspace in Rosebud that operate out of a small building will be able to move into. That's going to open shortly and provide more mental health support as well as other services for younger people. But also private organisations like Jimmy's Wellbeing Hub, where I've had the pleasure to walk through a couple of times, and they've made a very unique space for young people to be able to come in after school. They've got bunk rooms where, with the consent of the parents, kids are able to come in and stay the night, sometimes to give the child or the younger person a break from the pressures and the stress at home, to try to get some of that relief, but also sometimes to give the parents a bit of relief in their situation. And the people that operate Jimmy's, they take these kids in, they do yoga, they have massage, they have Reiki, they have all sorts of wellbeing services, but they do it in conjunction with the families to make sure that it is a response that helps the families and the kids. So, mental health, there is organisations doing terrific work in my area, but at the same time, I still think more needs to be done. Look, a couple more points just on the bill. Ideally, the government would have consulted a little more widely when they drafted this back in 2022. The mental health sector didn't see a full exposure draft of the original bill. The first time they saw the full piece of legislation was when it was actually tabled in the Parliament, which resulted in many errors which should have been corrected through, should be corrected through amending now. The government's also known that there was a mental health workforce crisis for quite some time. And as stated, the 2019 Royal Commission urged the government to immediately address those workforce shortages. We're getting there, but I think things need to be done more quickly. And the reality is that the mental health system can't be reformed without skilled and qualified people to deliver mental health support, care and services. The pushback on timeframe for the regional health and wellbeing boards to be appointed indicates the government is slipping behind on implementing the Royal Commission's recommendations with prescribed timeframes. But look, overall, I know there's a reasoned amendment. There's a couple of clauses there we would have liked to take into committee to go through in detail. I think overall the bill addresses a lot of the concerns that the industry had, but as we said, we will move that reasoned amendment. We do support a health-led response rather than a police-led response. yeah, and I will support the member for Lowen's position on the bill.